Vietnam was the first helicopter war and the first television war, a war the United States fought to prevent communism taking over South Vietnam. A war that changed from counterinsurgency to full-scale conventional war with helicopter gunships in the sky and British-made hovercraft patrolling the river deltas. Despite their technological supremacy, the Americans still lost the war. Despite the bombing, including B-52s, the regular North Vietnamese army survived and went on, finally, to capture Saigon. For the civilians, though, the war was always with them. For the people of Vietnam, their 30-year war began in 1945 when a nationalist Marxist guerrilla movement known as the Viet Minh started a campaign to liberate the whole of French Indochina. To stop Viet Minh infiltration from Laos, the French decided to retake and fortify a remote village called Dien Bien Phu. It was the crucial mistake of the war, leading to encirclement by 4 Viet Minh divisions, the collapse of the French strongpoints like dominoes, and France's surrender, not just of Dien Bien Phu, but of Indochina itself. Chosen for its easy resupply and reinforcement from the air, Dien Bien Phu was retaken by the French parachutistes coloniaux and chasseurs parachutistes in November 1953. From here, to preempt the Viet Minh's expected spring offensive, they would mount long-range patrols into the mountains of Laos behind. They prepared their defenses, believing they were beyond range of any Viet Minh artillery occupying those surrounding mountains. But as French supply drops continued, the Viet Minh were receiving Chinese long-range artillery freed at the end of the Korean War. It gave the Viet Minh a long-sought opportunity to confront the French in a set-piece battle and defeat them. Led by Brigadier General Christian de Castries, the French garrison soon found that instead of the free-ranging, cavalry-style, aggressive patrolling they'd envisaged, they faced a bloody siege. And even their air power would fail them. From the hills, Viet Minh artillery, consisting of Chinese 105mm guns, pounded the French strongpoints, while infantry burrowed trenches ever closer before mounting the human wave assault that finally ended the battle. It was a triumphant use of First World War siege tactics to avoid the prohibitive casualties of an open ground assault. The French surrendered not just their fortified base, but their Indo-Chinese empire. An armistice in Geneva split the country. In the south, a fragile democracy ruled by the Emperor Bao Dai. In the north, a communist state ruled by the Viet Minh leader Ho Chi Minh. The Viet Minh was led by Vo Nguyen Giap, a self-taught general who began his revolutionary war with only 44 men and ended it commanding 22 divisions. The victory of Dien Bien Phu, based on meticulous planning and brilliant opportunism, confirmed him as the outstanding general of the war against the French and later of the Vietnam War when he faced 2 American generals. William C. Westmoreland led the United States Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, from 1964. A West Point graduate, his style could be described as aggressive optimism. General Westmoreland had a distinguished Second World War record as an airborne corps commander. During 4 years in Vietnam, he sought victory by search and destroy operations and sheer force of numbers. His deputy, General Creighton W. Abrams, succeeded him. A West Point classmate of Westmoreland, General Abrams had a volatile personality, but like his former chief, an equally brilliant war record, this time as an armored corps commander who distrusted paratroop techniques. He faced declining morale at a time when his country was trying hard to get out of the war. The North Vietnamese, rebuilding and regrouping behind the demilitarized zone, sharply increased aid to South Vietnam's Viet Cong guerrillas in the 1960s. The United States now worried that, like Dien Bien Phu and North Vietnam, all the fledgling democracies of Southeast Asia would fall like dominoes to the communists. To stiffen resistance by the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, ARVIN, the United States sent 33 helicopters. The H-21 Shawnees were near obsolete, but they brought air mobility to the conflict for the first time. It was a crucial turning point. The war would never be the same. But Arvin troops took poor advantage. Few would disembark from hovering helicopters, and when they did land, they milled about, presenting an easy target to enemy forces. On the ground, the South Vietnamese were unable to hold a guerrilla army growing in strength. Major efforts like Operation Morning Star either eliminated too few Viet Cong or failed to make contact at all, convincing many Americans that Arvin was too poorly trained and led for the job. Alongside the helicopters, the United States began Operation Ranch Hand, the aerial spraying of Agent Orange herbicide to defoliate the guerrillas' jungle hideouts. They called it a modern technological area denial technique, and in the next 9 years, the C-123 providers would drop an estimated 19 million gallons of it. The effects on the ground were devastating, but on the guerrillas' ability to hide, they were negligible. The forced relocation of villagers living in heavily infiltrated areas was a third arm of American policy. They called it pacification. It began with Operation Sunrise. People who'd never seen a helicopter before were airlifted with a few possessions to strategic hamlets, fortified villages specially built to be easily guarded. To a conservative peasantry distrustful of government officials, the new policy was highly unpopular and soon began to collapse both politically and militarily. Despite their impressive fortifications, the Viet Cong found the hamlets an easy target for their propaganda. With 23,000 advisors now in South Vietnam, the United States was on the brink of war. Then the American destroyer Maddox was reportedly attacked by communist torpedo boats off North Vietnam. No damage was caused, but one torpedo boat was sunk by Maddox gunfire. Retribution followed from the packed decks of the aircraft carrier Constellation as the fleet commander, Admiral Thomas Moore, ordered airstrikes by Phantom and Crusader fighter bombers against North Vietnamese naval bases. At home, Congress finally voted President Johnson extensive military powers under Public Law 88/408. In Vietnam, General Giap raised the stakes by moving North Vietnamese regular units across the demilitarized zone. This was invasion, so the United States launched B-52 strikes from their Pacific base at Guam and then landed Marines at Da Nang. A full brigade came ashore, the 9th Marine Expeditionary Brigade, numbering 3,500 men. With them, their Patton tanks and the curious M50A1 Ontos anti-tank vehicle, whose 6 mounted recoilless rifles would see service later in Hue, one of the decisive battles of the war. It took 4 days to complete the landing. Meanwhile, light artillery cleared the way ahead to South Vietnam's second city, Da Nang itself. At this stage of the conflict, American strategy was to create a safe enclave from which to support Arvin counterinsurgency operations. Already, the difficulties of the local terrain were becoming clear. Progress could be painfully slow, presenting easy targets for Viet Cong or North Vietnamese snipers. Strategic bombing, Operation Rolling Thunder, was also introduced to disrupt any build-up of North Vietnamese forces north of the demilitarized zone. Only after 2 years were targets around Hanoi included. The B-52 Stratofortress carried an 84,000-pound conventional payload, but raids had to be routed through Hong Kong air traffic control, losing any secrecy. Bedeviled by opposing political and military priorities, Rolling Thunder was later confirmed to be a failure. North Vietnamese movements in strength into South Vietnam marked the turning point. In a few months, they built up their numbers, mainly in the heart to defend Central Highlands, to just short of 250,000 men and women under arms. Quick successes against Arvin units prompted the end of pacification. General Westmoreland began his war of attrition with Operation Kickoff. It inaugurated 3 years of search and destroy operations. The Pentagon believed the strategy was bringing the communists to the brink of defeat, but it also locked the United States into a ground war in Asia. 1966 saw the first large-scale search and destroy missions of the war. Operation Masher aimed to snuff out guerrilla insurgency around Bong Son, while another operation targeted the so-called Iron Triangle, a communist stronghold on the borders of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Operation Masher was launched by the 1st Cavalry's Air Mobile Division, but its name was quickly changed to White Wing by President Johnson, who feared the original would attract public criticism. Helicopters were a weapon of which even General Giap had no experience, and at first he underestimated them. His troops were often surprised and took severe casualties. But very often American intelligence was faulty, particularly about the strength of the enemy units opposing them. Sometimes the sweeps found only dry holes, positions vacated by a vanished enemy. They also found that a guerrilla army wins if it doesn't lose, while a conventional one loses if it doesn't win. If a contact was made, the infantry would move in strength, ranging from a platoon to a battalion. The assault unit only got into a real fight if the opposition was cornered or staged an ambush. Platoon commanders ordered their deployments while still distant Viet Cong or main force positions were shelled from fire bases deep in the rear. Then followed the technique known as a pylon, with all available ground units brought in to trap the enemy forces. An elusive enemy believed the Americans wasted firepower. Armor would be summoned up to shield the advance. Extra M60 machine guns converted these M113s into armored cavalry assault vehicles whose ability to adapt to Vietnamese conditions surprised even General Westmoreland. Intended to win local support, by rooting out the Viet Cong, these operations often had the opposite effect. For the local peasants, the machinery of war merely brought terror. Insurgent forces operated close to the civilian population. Often, they were the civilian population. Suspect Viet Cong were rounded up and the identities of others were checked. Their wounded were taken away too, and a place found for them as well as for the wounded Americans when the call went to the Medivac units based near